Before we begin the message today, I'd like to take a couple moments for some personal privilege. First of all, I'd like to personally welcome, it's going to be a long day. Welcome the Reverend Jack Troutman, former pastor here. And I know you probably didn't ask for that, but I wanted to give it anyway, Jack. We're glad you're back with us visiting today. Thank you. On the other hand, too, I'd like to say a personal word of thank you for so many folks who've supported me over the last couple of weeks, and I received a lot of phone calls, emails, cards in support of my loss, and I do greatly appreciate all that you've done. I was saying in the first service, one people in the first service even went to the trouble of finding out where in the world Montpelier, Indiana was so they could send some flowers, and so I do appreciate everything that everyone's done. It's kind of was reminded, as I said in the first service, doing the twins baptisms, that how the circle of life runs, and so just reminded of that as just a week ago on Saturday, I did the service for my 7-year-old grandson, and then to do baptisms today reminded me of God's sustaining and enduring love in the midst of even painful loss, and so it was great for that, so thank you. And now if we could, let us pray together. O Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. We're continuing with our sermon series as we talk about things we might learn from the leadership principles of basketball coach John Wooden. And if you don't know who he is, there's a little insert in the bulletin. I'll give you more information. But one of the things we're talking about today is one of those most frightening and scary words that you ever hear in the church. We're talking about change. We're talking about seeking not only change, but significant change. And that scares the bejeebies out of people in the church, because we like things to be the way they were. And I wonder why we're so frightened about change. Have you thought about it? Sometimes it's just because things are new and they're different. And when they're new and they're different, we just hate to kind of say, oh, this is a good thing, and we're gonna be a part of this. And other times, some people don't want change to happen because they have control issues. Now, I know there are no people in this church like that, but I've had people in other churches that had control issues and just didn't want to let go of things. And so sometimes we don't want anything to change because we're scared we're losing control. There's an old story, you know, about how many Methodists it takes to change a light bulb, and the answer is 9. It takes 1 to unscrew the bulb and 8 to talk about how good the old bulb was. And that's what we are when we face change. We get so caught up in those things, don't we? We sometimes hate for change to occur. And one of the other reasons, I think sometimes it's so much easier to see the barriers and the obstacles to change than to deal with the importance of making the change regardless of barriers and obstacles. And so that's the way it goes. John Wooden, in the book that I've been using for this sermon series, gives an illustration of how that was true for him. He was coach at UCLA for about 10 years, and they practiced in this facility he simply called the old gym. He said it was in such bad shape, and not only was it in bad shape, but he had to share the gym usage with other sports programs, and it was so small that they could not even play their home basketball games in that gymnasium. They would have to go to local community colleges to play their home games. And he thought, with those obstacles and barriers, there's no way that he could even come close to winning a national championship, not even have a competitive team. And in 1961, in spite of all those things, he took his team to the championship game of the National College Tournament and lost on kind of a fluke at the ending by 2 points. He said he sat down after the game with his coaches and players, and he realized that he had been the one that had been putting subconscious barriers into the possibilities of winning a national championship. And so from that moment on, he resolved to seek significant change no matter what happened. And not only that, he knew that in doing that, he needed to listen. And on the way back from that game, one of his assistant coaches, a man named Jerry Norman, who had talked to him about this issue before, just talked to him about the importance of perhaps they should go to a very, very intense pressing defense. And although Coach Wooden had heard it before, in that moment he was open to seeking new and significant change. He switched to that defense, which became one of the trademarks of his 10 national championship basketball teams. And he did that by learning that we have to overcome barriers, and sometimes the barriers are put in front of us by ourselves, not by other people. He believed certain things, that we should never be content with performance or results if we're not getting what we want. We should always strive to do better. We should reach out for that one that's just a little bit further down the road. And we should do it. He said we should remove all excuses from getting to the next level. I think there's good advice there for the church and for us as individuals. What excuses do we use to keep from getting to the next level in our lives, in our spiritual journeys, in our journey as a church? He said we should learn how not to say no, but instead say how. How can we overcome this obstacle? How can we overcome this barrier? So as people of faith, why in the world should we be interested in change? Why should we seek change? Well, for one thing, I think there's something that's very, very clear. That it's often in the midst of change that God is made manifest, that we see God better than we ever have. I mean, if you don't believe me, we just had Bible presentation Sunday. Dig into that Bible. Look at the stories. Look at the stories of when God has sought change in people and families and nations. It's when God is most clearly with them. When Abraham had to move his whole family, God was with them. When the Israelites left slavery with the Exodus, God was with them and God was visibly traveling with them. And so it's often most that when we're in the midst of change, that we most clearly see God. Now, the honest truth is, everyone struggles with change. I mean, some of us learn to like it and embrace it, but we all struggle with it. Doesn't matter if you're conservative or you're liberal. I have to admit, conservatives are more blunt about change. If you ask conservative about change, they'll just say, I don't like it. Now, liberals are a little more subtle. Oh, they'll say, we're all for change. Let's form a committee and study it. And we know what committees do in the church, don't we? They bury stuff. They kill stuff sometimes. And so we all struggle with change. And yet it's so significant and it's so important to go forward. I think of the scriptures a lot when I think about the importance of change. One of the stories that's so clearly about change that Jesus tells is when he says that you can't put new wine into old wineskins. And it's so true. I mean, we've got change coming, but we've got to shape ourselves to that change and help it happen. If you put new wine into old wineskins, you know what happens? Wine continues to ferment. And as it continues to ferment, it continues to expand. And eventually, if you have this old wineskin, it just kind of explodes, and the wine is lost. So he knew that when new ideas were coming, we had to be able to stretch, don't we? We have to be able to push our own boundaries if we're seeking significant change in our lives or in the church. Jesus also talked a lot about new things. He talked about a new covenant, a new commandment. He was always pushing for change. One of my favorite things is the scriptures themselves. Jesus would say, well, you've seen it written this way, but I say even more. He pushed us further out in love, in grace, in forgiveness, in all that we did. Jesus pushed our boundaries because he knew change was important. And I think the challenge for us today as people of faith is to respond to what Jesus is saying to us. Jesus knew some things that are important for us to know. First of all, the past is not set in stone. Sometimes when we look back at the past, we act like everything just was the way it was always, and there was no struggles. There was no life in coming to conclusions and decisions. And so we realize that though we may have picked blue carpet 10 years ago, it's not set in stone. We could actually pick red if we wanted to. We don't have to continue to buy blue carpet. All those things are like that. We think of the past. And God's relationship with us is a living relationship. Never forget that. God is always pushing us to grow, and God is ministering to us. So it's not this stagnant, dead relationship we have with God, but we have a living relationship with a living God. And so things change, don't they? Life is in process, right? I mean, nothing stays the same ever, does it? And so the importance of understanding that is critical for us. And never forget this either. God's biggest revelation to us was not in the laws or the Ten Commandments, but it was in a living, breathing person, his Son, Jesus. And that's his biggest. That's how we know God. We know God because of who Jesus was and what he did and what he said and what he accomplished. And so God comes to us in a relationship. And what are all relationships? Do all relationships stay the same? None of them stay the same, do they? In fact, if they're going to be good, they have to grow, don't they? And so we grow and we change and we see what happens. And I came across the phrase as I was working on the message this week, and it originally was kind of a sports phrase, and now we use it in all kinds of areas and disciplines. But it's the phrase game changer. You see, game changers are people that seek significant change in whatever field it is. When we're talking about sports, and we might talk about, oh, well, if this football team can get this particular player, he's a what? Game changer. They're going to be a lot better. The Arizona Cardinals became a lot better when they got Larry Fitzgerald. He was a game changer for the Cardinals, and that happens for us. Well, I was reading about some of those in life today, and not today, I'm sorry, I was preparing the message for today. And one of those I read about, you probably don't know his name, but he's an actor. His name is Joseph Gordon-Levitt. His biggest claim to fame at one time was he started a TV show called Third Rock from the Sun. That's not great fame. He's been in several movies, but what he's done that's a game changer is this. He's developed a website, and it's hitrecord.com, in where young, creative movie artists, producers, directors, those that make the movies, can submit their films to this site, and so they can be viewed and they can be lifted up. In fact, he believes that in the future, the web is going to be the place that new movies come. And so independent people that don't have much money can produce really excellent movies. That's a game changer if that comes true, isn't it? I mean, that's a big deal. I've thought about that a lot as I was preparing. There's so many other areas like that. There was somebody who's a real game changer whose birthday was today. Anybody know? It's not me. It is my birthday, you're right. But I'm not the game changer. I'm talking about Mother Teresa. Now, we share a birthday. But do you know that in 1945, Mother Teresa went to India to begin her work among the poor and with the dying, and the Catholic Church did not support the ministry. They did not think it would work. But she decided to be a game changer anyway and said, this ministry will work. This ministry has to happen. And 5 years later, the then Pope decided it was worth supporting. And we know the rest of the story. She was a game changer without the support of the church. You know, by the way, the church is usually behind game changers. We don't usually endorse game changers. They're out there changing things, and then the church comes along behind and says, boy, that was a good idea. And it happens everywhere. And so we think about those things, those game-changing people. There's another one that's going on right in our own state, and I know you're going to laugh at this, but I have hope. And it's called the O'Connor House. Anybody familiar with the O'Connor House? Anybody familiar with Sandra Day O'Connor? She was head of our state, not governor, but state representatives, went on to be the Supreme Court Justice. Well, she was known for building relationships across parties. And one of the goals of the O'Connor House is to help return civility to politics. Sounds impossible right now if you turn on the TV, doesn't it? But somebody has to be a game changer. Somebody has to start the process and say, we're tired of the way things are. We're going to change things and make them different. And then I was thinking about a couple things to do with just today. Game-changing things. I thought of those Bibles that were presented in the first service. Do you know the Bible should be a game changer? It's not just full of rules and regulations and history. It's full of stories that bring our faith to life. And once you learn those, then you share those in life and you change the game for those around you. This last week, after my one grandson passed away, there were 8 of my grandchildren, the other 8, and we were all packed into a house that my 2 daughters and son-in-laws, and we're all packed into one house. And I have one good granddaughter who's got this illness. It's called Deuce syndrome, and it's an illness that causes seizures. And because of that, she's really become independent. And so she was down by me one day. I said, Kira, why don't you come and sit with Grandpa? And she said, nope. And about 2 seconds later, she got up and sat with Grandpa. And I said, Kira, you remind me of a Bible story. And she said, what? And I said, yeah, there was a story in the Bible about a man who had 2 children. And he asked them to do something, and the one child said, yes, they would do it. But they didn't do it. And the other child said, no, I won't, but they did it. And the question is, who did the Father's will? I said, which one are you, Kira? And she said, I'm the one that did it. I said, yes, you are. You're the one that did it. You see, Bible stories can change us. They can become game changers for changing the world around us, for feeding the hungry, for clothing the naked, for visiting the sick, for changing this world in which we live in. They're there and they're game-changing stories. And the final one was today's baptisms. I believe that baptisms are game changers. When I went to seminary, a lot of you already know, if you're not new, that I wasn't raised in the church. And so I joined the church, was baptized as an adult. And when I went to seminary, I was struggling with that concept of infant baptism. Well, why would we baptize infants? And then I studied it. And I studied what Wesley said. And I began to believe it. And then what I saw it in action. And I saw how in some kind of God's mystery, children that were baptized were nurtured and fed in the church. And they didn't give up. They often didn't give up on God and the church, regardless of the circumstance. And so for me, I began to understand that is a game-changing event in the lives of children and also in the lives of church. And so today, I'm going to call upon you to become game changers. I think it's so critically important. I mean, here we are. We sit in a church that's a downtown church. Do you know how many downtown churches are growing today? If you said 0, you would probably be really close. There are a few across this country that have been able to revitalize and turn things around. So there are folks that throw obstacles out at us and they say, there's no way you can revitalize this downtown church. It's destined to die. They used to have 1,600 members. They're destined to die. They're destined to be done with. Well, I want to say we're not destined to be done with. And God is seeking us to become game changers and to change things here. And we're already seeing it in so many places. We talked about the tipping points last time I preached. And we're getting so close and so many ministries are happening that weren't here 4 and 5 years ago. But God is seeking significant change from us. And when we significantly change ourselves and grow, we significantly change our church, and it significantly changes our community and our world. We can make a difference. And we do it by never giving up, never looking at the obstacles and not saying no, but say, how do we get over that obstacle? How do we get around that? How do we get under? I don't care which way we go. What's important is we figure out ways to go. I think our church is on the verge of something spectacular, something amazing. And it's going to take each and every one of us seeking significant change to help create the energy to make it happen. God is calling each of us. Are you willing to participate and become a game changer, to overcome the obstacles, and to take us to places we never anticipated going, and to realize that perhaps, no matter how great our past, the best is yet to come. Thanks be to God. Amen.